June 4, 1961. Vienna, Austria. President John F. Kennedy sits across the table from Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. This is their final meeting after 2 tense days of talks. The atmosphere in the room is heavy and uncomfortable. For 2 full days, Khrushchev has been aggressive and confrontational. He has spoken forcefully, interrupted often, and treated the young American president with open disdain. According to multiple accounts from people who were present, Kennedy appears shaken. The meetings have not gone well. Khrushchev lectures Kennedy about the failures of capitalism. He threatens war over the future of Berlin. He speaks as if the Soviet Union holds the upper hand and makes little effort to hide his contempt. To many observers, it feels less like a diplomatic discussion and more like a political ambush. When the summit finally ends, Kennedy boards Air Force One for the flight back to the United States. According to documented accounts, what he says to his advisors in the hours and days after leaving Vienna reveals a deeply troubled president. Kennedy is shocked by the intensity of Soviet hostility. He is worried about the confrontations that lie ahead. In private, he admits that the meetings went badly and that Khrushchev dominated the discussions. This is the story of what John F. Kennedy said after the Vienna summit. It is the story of how the meeting went disastrously wrong, and how Kennedy's own words reveal his fear that he had been outmatched by the Soviet leader. To understand what happened, we need to go back and look at the context of the Vienna summit and the 2 men who met there. John F. Kennedy became President of the United States on January 20, 1961. According to official records, he was 43 years old, making him the youngest elected president in American history. He was intelligent, charismatic, and confident in public. However, he had limited experience in foreign policy and global diplomacy. Nikita Khrushchev, by contrast, had been the leader of the Soviet Union since 1953. In 1961, he was 67 years old. He was a hardened and experienced political survivor. He had lived through Stalin's purges, defeated rivals inside the Communist Party, and secured his position at the top of the Soviet system. Khrushchev was blunt, emotional, and unpredictable, but he was also skilled and ruthless in negotiations. The 2 leaders agreed to meet in Vienna in early June 1961 for their first face-to-face summit. According to official records, the meetings took place on June 3 and June 4, 1961. The stated goal was to establish a working relationship and discuss major Cold War issues, including nuclear testing and the future of Berlin. But Kennedy arrived in Vienna weakened by recent events. Just 6 weeks earlier, in April 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba had ended in complete failure. The CIA-backed attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro collapsed almost immediately. Cuban forces captured more than 1,000 invaders, and the operation became a global embarrassment for the new American president. Khrushchev knew this, and in Vienna he used it. From the start, the summit became a test of strength. Khrushchev pressed hard, sensing inexperience and vulnerability. Kennedy tried to hold his ground, but the imbalance was clear. What was meant to be a diplomatic introduction turned into a sobering lesson for the young president.
President Kennedy had approved the Bay of Pigs operation, but when the invasion began to fail, he refused to provide direct U.S. air support. According to multiple accounts, Kennedy later took full public responsibility for the disaster. He told the American people that the failure was his alone. Nikita Khrushchev saw the event very differently. According to various historical sources, he viewed the Bay of Pigs invasion as proof that Kennedy was weak and inexperienced. To Khrushchev, the young American president appeared cautious, uncertain, and unwilling to take decisive military action. Later declassified Soviet intelligence reports support this view. They show that Khrushchev believed Kennedy could be pressured and intimidated in a direct confrontation. This belief shaped how the Soviet leader approached their first meeting. The Vienna summit began on June 3, 1961. According to accounts from American participants, including Kennedy's interpreter and senior advisors, the talks went badly almost immediately. From the very first session, Khrushchev launched into a long lecture. He spoke confidently about what he described as the inevitable victory of communism over capitalism. He framed the Cold War as a historical process that could not be stopped. According to the official American Memorandum of Conversation preserved in the Kennedy Presidential Library, Khrushchev told Kennedy that the United States should not support what he called obsolete regimes. He argued that America was trying to block the natural course of history by opposing communist movements around the world. Khrushchev said that the ideas of communism appealed to people and that social ideas could not be destroyed by military force. In his view, no amount of weapons or pressure could stop communism from spreading. He went on to claim that the Soviet Union supported communist ideas but did not force them on other nations. However, he issued a clear warning. According to the memorandum, Khrushchev said that if the United States tried to prevent revolutionary movements from developing, serious conflicts would follow. This was not a subtle message. Khrushchev was making it clear that the Soviet Union would continue to support communist movements worldwide and that American interference could lead to war. Kennedy attempted to respond. According to the memorandum, he spoke about freedom, national independence, and the right of people to choose their own political systems. He argued that the United States was defending self-determination, not trying to control other nations. But according to accounts from those in the room, Kennedy struggled to gain control of the conversation. Khrushchev frequently interrupted him, brushed aside his points, and continued speaking at length. The balance of the discussion clearly favored the Soviet leader. The second day of meetings, on June 4, 1961, focused heavily on Berlin. According to official records, Berlin was a divided city. East Berlin was controlled by the communist government of East Germany, while West Berlin remained under the protection of Western powers. West Berlin was a Western-controlled enclave deep inside communist territory. The situation was tense and dangerous. The Soviet Union wanted Western military forces to leave Berlin. Khrushchev argued that their presence was unacceptable and threatened to change the status of the city if the West did not comply. For Kennedy, Berlin was becoming the central test of the Cold War, and the Vienna summit was showing just how high the stakes really were. According to the official American memorandum of the meeting, Khrushchev told President Kennedy that the Soviet Union planned to take a dramatic step. He said that by the end of 1961, the Soviet Union would sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany. This decision would have serious consequences. A separate peace treaty would effectively end Western occupation rights in Berlin. It could also allow East Germany, backed by the Soviet Union, to block or control Western access routes into West Berlin. Kennedy immediately pushed back. According to the memorandum, he responded that Western rights in Berlin were not temporary or informal. They were based on formal agreements made after World War II. He stated clearly that the United States and its allies intended to defend those rights. Khrushchev's reply was blunt and threatening. According to the official record, he said that the Soviet Union would go ahead and sign the peace treaty. He insisted that the sovereignty of the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, would have to be respected. He warned that any violation of that sovereignty would be regarded by the Soviet Union as an act of open aggression, with all the serious consequences that would follow. This was a direct threat of war. Khrushchev was making it clear that if the United States tried to maintain access to Berlin after the treaty was signed, the Soviet Union would treat it as a military attack. Kennedy understood exactly what this meant. According to the memorandum, he responded with a stark and chilling statement. He said, "Then, Mr. Chairman, there will be a war. It will be a cold winter." With these words, both leaders openly acknowledged the possibility of war over Berlin. The exchange, preserved in official records, shows just how close the discussion came to direct confrontation. However, according to American participants who witnessed the meetings, the tone of the exchange mattered just as much as the words. Khrushchev spoke forcefully and confidently. He dominated the conversation, pressed his advantage, and showed little concern for compromise. Kennedy, by contrast, appeared defensive and reactive. He responded to Khrushchev's challenges rather than setting the agenda himself. Observers later recalled that the imbalance in experience and confidence was obvious. The Vienna summit ended on June 4, 1961, without any agreements, compromises, or progress. No joint statements were issued. No issues were resolved. According to multiple accounts from those present, when the meetings concluded, President Kennedy was visibly shaken. The summit that was meant to ease Cold War tensions had instead deepened them, and Kennedy left Vienna fully aware that the world had entered a far more dangerous phase.
What President Kennedy said immediately after the Vienna summit is recorded in several historical sources. The earliest and most direct account comes from James Reston, a senior journalist for the New York Times. Reston had known Kennedy for years and was granted rare access to him. According to Reston's later account, he interviewed Kennedy almost immediately after the summit ended. The meeting took place on June 4, 1961, while Kennedy was still in Vienna. Reston later described this encounter in his memoir Deadline, published in 1991. According to Reston, Kennedy appeared deeply exhausted. He looked tense, worn down, and emotionally shaken by the experience of the summit. This was not the confident, energetic president the public usually saw. During their conversation, Kennedy spoke with unusual honesty. According to Reston's account, Kennedy admitted that the meetings with Khrushchev had gone very badly. He did not try to hide his frustration or disappointment. At one point, Kennedy summed up the entire experience in a single blunt sentence. According to Reston, Kennedy said, "He just beat the hell out of me." The comment was striking. It showed how strongly Kennedy felt that he had been overwhelmed during the talks. It also revealed that, in his own private assessment, he believed Khrushchev had dominated the summit. This candid admission gives rare insight into Kennedy's state of mind in the immediate aftermath of Vienna. Away from cameras and speeches, he recognized that the meeting had been a serious setback and that the Cold War confrontation ahead would be far more dangerous than he had expected.
This was President Kennedy's immediate and honest assessment of the Vienna summit. In private, he believed that Khrushchev had dominated him during their meetings. James Reston later wrote that Kennedy was deeply worried about how Khrushchev now viewed him. According to Reston's account, Kennedy said that he faced a serious problem. He believed that Khrushchev saw him as young, inexperienced, and lacking toughness. Kennedy feared that as long as the Soviet leader held that view, meaningful negotiations would be impossible. Kennedy told Reston that words alone would not change Khrushchev's opinion. According to Reston, Kennedy said that Khrushchev would not respond to speeches or arguments. He believed that only firm actions would command respect. In Kennedy's mind, the lesson of Vienna was clear. Khrushchev needed to see the United States act, not just talk. As Kennedy left Vienna and boarded Air Force One for the flight back to Washington, those around him noticed a change in his mood. According to accounts from advisors on the plane, Kennedy was quiet, serious, and deeply reflective. The confidence he usually displayed was replaced by concern. According to historian Michael Beschloss's book, The Crisis Years, which is based on interviews with Kennedy administration officials, Kennedy spoke candidly to his aides during the flight. At one point, he described Khrushchev's reaction to a discussion about nuclear war. Kennedy said that he had explained how a nuclear exchange could kill tens of millions of people in minutes, but Khrushchev seemed unmoved. Kennedy recalled that Khrushchev looked at him as if to say, "So what?" This deeply disturbed Kennedy. It showed him that Khrushchev appeared willing to risk nuclear catastrophe to achieve Soviet goals. According to the same accounts, Khrushchev summed up the experience with a single word. He told his advisors, "He savaged me." The word choice was telling. Kennedy felt verbally attacked, overpowered, and overwhelmed by Khrushchev's aggressive style. When Kennedy returned to Washington on June 5, 1961, the private discussions continued. He spoke openly with close advisors and trusted friends about what had happened in Vienna. One of these accounts comes from Kenneth O'Donnell, Kennedy's appointment secretary and a close personal friend. In his memoir, Johnny, We Hardly Knew Ye, published in 1972, O'Donnell described a conversation with the president shortly after his return. According to O'Donnell, Kennedy believed that the Bay of Pigs disaster played a major role in how Khrushchev treated him. Kennedy thought that Khrushchev saw the failed invasion as proof of his inexperience. Worse, Kennedy believed Khrushchev concluded that a president who approved such an operation and then refused to fully support it lacked courage. Kennedy told O'Donnell that this perception encouraged Khrushchev to push harder. Once again, he used the same blunt phrase he had used with Reston. He said that Khrushchev beat the hell out of me. Another account comes from Theodore Sorensen, Kennedy's speechwriter and one of his closest advisors. In his memoir, Kennedy, published in 1965, Sorensen recalled Kennedy's reaction after Vienna. Kennedy said that Khrushchev treated him like a little boy. The phrase revealed a sense of personal humiliation. Kennedy felt talked down to, dismissed, and belittled by Khrushchev's aggressive style. Yet Kennedy did not express these feelings publicly. On June 6, 1961, he addressed the American people in a televised speech. According to the official transcript, Kennedy described the summit in calm and measured terms. He said the meetings had been serious and sober. He emphasized that there had been no insults, no loss of temper, and no ultimatums. Kennedy told the public that no major agreements had been reached, but also that no concessions had been made. He described the discussions as frank and useful, presenting the summit as a responsible exchange between two world leaders. This was Kennedy carefully managing public perception. Privately, he believed the summit had gone badly. Publicly, he presented it as constructive and controlled. However, even in this carefully worded speech, Kennedy issued a clear warning. According to the transcript, Kennedy told the American people that the most serious discussions had concerned Germany and Berlin. He stated plainly that the United States was in Berlin because of firm commitments and because the people of Berlin wanted American protection. Kennedy ended with a strong declaration. He said that America's commitment to Berlin was solemn and that the United States was going to stay. Despite Khrushchev's threats, Kennedy made it clear that the United States would not abandon Berlin.
In public, President Kennedy spoke calmly about the Vienna summit. He described it as serious, useful, and controlled. But in private, according to many historical accounts, Kennedy was far more worried than his public statements suggested. According to historian Robert Dallek's biography, An Unfinished Life, published in 2003 and based on Kennedy administration records, Kennedy spoke frankly about his concerns soon after the summit. In a phone call with British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, Kennedy admitted that he expected serious trouble ahead. He told Macmillan, "I think it's going to be a very mean year." This comment revealed Kennedy's true state of mind. He believed that the Vienna summit had not reduced tensions, but instead made future confrontation with the Soviet Union more likely. Kennedy's negative assessment of the summit was shared by his closest advisors. Secretary of State Dean Rusk, who attended the Vienna meetings, later described the experience in his memoir, As I Saw It, published in 1990. Rusk wrote that Khrushchev's behavior in Vienna was unusually harsh. He described Khrushchev's performance as brutal and said that the Soviet leader attacked Kennedy with a level of ferocity he had never seen in any previous diplomatic encounter. According to Rusk, after returning to Washington, Kennedy and his advisors carefully reviewed what had gone wrong. The general conclusion was clear. Khrushchev had come to Vienna with the intention of intimidating the young American president, and he had succeeded in creating that impression. The Vienna summit did not end with agreements, but it did have serious consequences. According to historical records, Kennedy's fear that Khrushchev now viewed him as weak directly influenced several major decisions. First, Kennedy decided to strengthen America's military position. According to official records, he requested a large increase in defense spending. In July 1961, just weeks after Vienna, Kennedy asked Congress for billions of dollars in additional military funding. He also moved to strengthen NATO forces, signaling that the United States would be better prepared for confrontation if it came. Second, Kennedy resolved to take a firm stand on Berlin. When Khrushchev and East Germany began building the Berlin Wall in August 1961, Kennedy responded decisively. According to official records, he reinforced American troops in West Berlin and made it clear that the United States would defend Western access rights to the city. While Kennedy accepted the wall as a tragic symbol of division, he refused to allow Soviet interference with American and Allied positions. Third, the Vienna experience made Kennedy more cautious in direct confrontations with Khrushchev. According to multiple accounts, Kennedy learned that Khrushchev was willing to take enormous risks, even when nuclear war was a possibility. The summit taught Kennedy that managing Cold War crises required patience, restraint, and careful calculation, not emotional reactions or impulsive threats. These lessons would prove critical the following year. The Vienna summit also shaped Kennedy's thinking during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. According to many historians, Kennedy believed that Khrushchev placed nuclear missiles in Cuba partly because of the impressions he formed at Vienna. Khrushchev may have believed that Kennedy could be pressured into backing down. During the missile crisis, Kennedy was determined not to repeat Vienna. He was resolved not to allow Khrushchev to dominate him again. The painful lessons of the Vienna summit helped shape Kennedy's leadership in one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War, and may have played a role in preventing a nuclear catastrophe.
Years later, President Kennedy looked back on the Vienna summit and reflected on what it had meant to him personally and politically. According to historian Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a close advisor and trusted confidant of Kennedy, the president continued to think about Vienna long after the meetings ended. In his memoir, 1,000 Days, published in 1965, Schlesinger wrote that Kennedy later spoke openly about the summit and what he believed he had learned from it. According to Schlesinger, Kennedy said that after Vienna, he realized he had to prove himself.
He said, "I had to show him that we can be as tough as he is. I'll have to show him." This statement revealed how Kennedy interpreted the experience. He did not see Vienna as a failure to forget, but as a challenge that required a response. In Kennedy's mind, strength had to be demonstrated, not just spoken. Nikita Khrushchev's view of the Vienna summit was very different. In his memoir, Khrushchev Remembers, published in 1970, Khrushchev wrote that he found Kennedy intelligent and thoughtful, but inexperienced. He claimed that he did not intend to humiliate the American president. According to Khrushchev, he believed he was simply stating Soviet positions firmly and honestly. However, other evidence suggests a more calculated approach. According to declassified Soviet documents, Khrushchev told senior Soviet officials after the summit that Kennedy was weak and could be pressured, especially on issues such as Berlin. These documents indicate that Khrushchev believed the Vienna meetings confirmed his advantage and encouraged him to push harder in future confrontations. What Kennedy said after Vienna is unusually well documented. Immediately after the summit, Kennedy spoke privately with New York Times journalist James Reston. According to Reston's account, Kennedy admitted, "He just beat the hell out of me." It was a blunt and emotional assessment of the encounter. Kennedy also told Reston that he faced a serious problem. He believed Khrushchev now thought he was young, inexperienced, and lacking courage. Kennedy feared that unless this perception changed, productive negotiations would be impossible. On the flight back to Washington aboard Air Force One, Kennedy continued to reflect on the meetings. According to accounts from advisors on the plane, Kennedy described Khrushchev as unlike any leader he had met before. He said that when he spoke about the devastating human cost of nuclear war, Khrushchev seemed unmoved, as if to say, "So what?" At another point, Kennedy summed up the experience with a single word. He said, "He savaged me." After returning to Washington, Kennedy spoke with Kenneth O'Donnell, his appointments secretary and close friend. According to O'Donnell's memoir, Kennedy again used the same phrase. He said that Khrushchev beat the hell out of me and suggested that Khrushchev believed a young and inexperienced president who failed at the Bay of Pigs had no guts. Kennedy also shared his feelings with Theodore Sorensen, his speechwriter and one of his most trusted advisors. According to Sorensen, Kennedy said that Khrushchev treated him like a little boy. The phrase captured Kennedy's sense of personal humiliation and frustration. Kennedy even expressed his concern to foreign leaders. In a conversation with British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, Kennedy admitted he expected a difficult period ahead. He told Macmillan, "I think it's going to be a very mean year." Taken together, these accounts provide a clear picture of how deeply the Vienna summit affected John F. Kennedy. Privately, he believed he had been dominated and humiliated. Publicly, he maintained calm and confidence. And in the years that followed, the lessons of Vienna shaped how he confronted the Soviet Union during the most dangerous moments of the Cold War.
These documented statements make one thing clear. President Kennedy was deeply affected by the Vienna summit. In private, he believed that Nikita Khrushchev had dominated and intimidated him. He worried that this impression would encourage the Soviet Union to act more aggressively around the world. Kennedy feared that if Khrushchev saw him as weak, future confrontations would become even more dangerous. Because of this, Kennedy concluded that he needed to change Khrushchev's assessment of him. He believed that strength had to be demonstrated through action, not just words. The Vienna summit convinced him that toughness and resolve were essential in dealing with the Soviet leader. In this way, Vienna became a defining moment in Kennedy's presidency. It was a moment of personal humiliation, but also a moment of learning. Kennedy understood that he could not afford to repeat the experience. The crises that followed, especially those involving Berlin and Cuba, were shaped by his determination never to appear weak again. What Kennedy said after Vienna reveals a president coming to terms with the harsh realities of the Cold War confrontation. His private admissions, statements like, "He beat the hell out of me," and "He savaged me like a little boy," show an unusual level of honesty about a diplomatic failure. Few world leaders have ever spoken so openly about being overmatched. But Kennedy did not allow the experience to paralyze him. Instead, he acted. He increased American military strength. He stood firm on Berlin when the crisis intensified. And when the Cuban Missile Crisis erupted in October 1962, he carefully managed the confrontation, resisting both reckless escalation and humiliating retreat. The young president who felt humiliated in June 1961 was not the same man who faced bound the most dangerous nuclear crisis in history the following year. Vienna forced Kennedy to grow quickly as a leader. In the end, what Kennedy said after Vienna revealed both his vulnerability and his determination. That combination, self-awareness paired with resolve, came to define his presidency during the most dangerous years of the Cold War.
This video is based on documented historical records. These include official memoranda from the Vienna Summit held at the Kennedy Presidential Library, published memoirs from Kennedy administration officials such as James Reston, Kenneth O'Donnell, Theodore Sorensen, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., and Dean Rusk, as well as President Kennedy's televised address from June 6, 1961. It also draws on Nikita Khrushchev's memoirs and declassified historical documents. All quotations used come from verified sources. Historical interpretations may differ among historians and scholars. Viewers are encouraged to consult multiple sources when studying this period of history. This content is intended for educational purposes.